y'all. Welcome to Crosspolitic. Big show today with Rod Martin. We're going to talk about all things SBC Convention. No Pastor Toby, no Chocolate Knox, just the white water boy. That's it. That's all you get. But we got Rod Martin coming on to talk about what happened at the SBC Convention coming up. As we think about church councils or church gatherings, not just your local Sunday gathering, but ecumenical councils, or not ecumenical, but even councils like SBC. They pretend they aren't Presbyterian, but every year, once a year, they're Presbyterian when they all meet. One of the things that God does when church councils come together, God is moving. You think of Acts chapter 15, the first council, the first example of a church council coming together. God works through councils. God works through when church leaders meet. And so don't be surprised that the New York Times covers these things, that big media covers these things, legacy media covers these things, because in some sense, they know these church councils are more important than we do. They know these church meetings are more important than we think. But God moves in these things, and so it's we like to follow the SBC Council. Of course, we follow the PCA Council. Of course, Presbytery. Of course, we follow our own denomination, the CREC's Church Council, when it happens, and so should you. Pay attention to these things, what's going on, because God is moving in these councils. So with that said, I want to bring on Rod Martin. Rod Martin is the founder and CEO of Martin Capital, investor, technology, entrepreneur, and futurist. I don't even know how you get that name, futurist. From Destin, Florida, Fox Business calls him a tech guru, and Blaze TV has named him one of the most America's leading public intellectuals. Rod, always good to have you on. Thanks for joining us, man.
Great to be here.
So the SBC happened this last week. First, do you agree with what I just said, kind of about like church meetings, church councils, kind of big, church leaders getting together? It seems like there's something extra special that God is doing in these things, or God's hands extra involved in that process, like you see in Acts chapter 15.
I absolutely agree. And, I take exception with one thing. I don't think we're being Presbyterians once a year. I think everything Baptists do runs on a business meeting somewhere. So in that, I think we could not be more Baptist than we are at the annual meeting. But yes, God moves in these things. And I think we saw that this year. There's a lot of disappointment here, and I think that's God provoking his people to get their act together. But there's also a lot of great stuff, like a really large majority of the messengers voting to call on the Supreme Court to revisit and overturn Obergefell, which is actually for a bunch of preachers pretty courageous, and it's the kind of thing we ought to be doing. Yeah, right.
No, and that was resolution, I think number 4. I think what it was. I think those are the correct numbers. It was it was called Restoring Moral Clarity, correct? And then it said on restoring moral clarity through God's design for gender, marriage, and the family. And within that, they specifically called on Obergefell to be overturned.
Yes.
And I don't have no, actually I do have the vote on it. It just said passed overwhelmingly, but there's no vote breakdown. So it must have been some sort of verbal up and down kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, if there was any dissent in the room, nobody knew it. It was one of those.
Okay.
And right now we've got a case working its way up that could potentially get taken up by the Supreme Court, and that could revisit this case. The problem with this case, I mean, there are all the moral issues, but setting that aside, there's simply nothing in the United States Constitution to allow the federal government to hijack marriage, which is what they've done. And really, if you're serious about the wording of Obergefell, as surely some plaintiffs are going to be, it legalizes polygamy. It legalizes marrying a tree in your backyard.
Right.
There's literally no limit on it. And it will be the wedge that gets you to pedophilia in due course if someone doesn't modify it.
Right. Now, I guess my one question about this, I'm very grateful the SBC did this. They should get tons of kudos for it. But why did it take so long? Why didn't the convention, right after Obergefell happened, why didn't they do this right then?
Well, we did speak to it back then.
Okay.
It is perhaps a little more interesting now because we have a significantly improved Supreme Court. They
Mm-hmm.
don't always do everything I want them to do, but they
Yeah.
do more of what I want them to do than any court in my lifetime or anybody else's for that matter. There's really an opportunity to revisit these things, and there are some justices who are on the record actually wanting to make a change.
Yeah, that's right. And so the SBC did address it, or they did talk about it, but did they pass a resolution against it when Obergefell dropped?
I don't recall, but I think we did. And certainly there were a lot of statements by key leaders. And this is one of the few things where the ERLC did the right thing. And, so it's been well addressed. But the moment is now. Focusing some attention on it now has some real potential to make change.
Okay. That's super helpful. Okay. Probably the most controversial resolution. There's two of them. I'll say there's two of them. But this was one of them. The constitutional amendment to ban women pastors. The proposed constitutional addendum, I guess, to bar any women from a pastor of any kind is roughly the gist of what that resolution was. But it failed. You need 62% of the vote, 63% of the vote.
You need 2/3, and you need it 2 years in a row. And we got way more than the 2/3 3 years ago. And then the platform weighed in. Our illustrious leadership weighed in heavily to tip the scales last year, and it came up about where it came up this year, around 61%. And so it's very clearly an overwhelming majority, even of the normal Southern Baptist Convention room. Not one like in Nashville where we turned out, twice as many messengers as normally show up. But in a normal year, there's still nearly a 2/3 majority for this. And there would be a 2/3, in fact, probably an 80% majority based on New Orleans. If the people on the platform weren't telling scare stories. Oh, this will get us sued. Well, you certainly didn't care about that when it was waiving attorney-client privilege. And that's been catastrophic.
That's right.
I can understand why they might be a little bit gun shy, but they're absolutely hypocritical. So anyway, we're going to keep coming with this. I think we'll get it done. And I think the Baptist Faith and Message is perfectly clear on this issue already. So there's the argument that, hey, we don't need this. No, we do need it because the Credentials Committee is consistently failing to enforce in most of the cases it should address, and this would force its hand.
Yeah. So I guess a couple clarifying questions there. So the resolution needs 66%. It got 61 this year. And you're saying it needs two conventions in a row. It needs to hit that 66% threshold.
You don't get to amend the Constitution easily. And that's a protection against somebody doing something crazy just because they showed up with a huge number of people in the room. Which, of course, is what I always want to do. I want to show up with a huge number of people in the room and do things that the liberals think are crazy.
Yeah. Okay. So the Baptist Faith and Message already says it. Why does that not really matter?
Well, the problem here is that a lot of churches, I wish it were only a few. We thought it was only a few. And then we discovered in the aftermath of the New Orleans Convention 2 years ago that there were as many as 2,000 churches that may be running afoul of this. And that's not our numbers. I mean, Mike Law did great work finding a bunch of churches that were a problem, but he only found several hundred. Then after it passed and the platform wanted desperately to kill it the next year, they started identifying especially African-American churches where you had female, not necessarily senior pastors, but associate pastors in various roles, and saying, oh, you can't do this because you're a racist. Oh, that's funny. 2 weeks ago, you said we couldn't do it because we didn't need to. Pick one. But either way, this is an issue that has to be addressed. We know where denominations go when they fail to address this. And our problem is that the Credentials Committee is not doing its job. And we need some constitutional clarity to force their hand.
Yeah. So I guess the other clarification is you mentioned that the platform tipped the scale on this vote. How did they tip the scale on this vote to get under that 2/3 threshold?
Well, a number of things. Certainly the normal networking. Look, in a normal year, the convention is split into about 3 groups. About a third is actually convention employees or people who wish they were or people who have been in the past, that kind of thing. A bunch of them get their way paid to the convention by one of the entities. So that's just grossly unfair and wrong. And then you have about a third that are like me or you. And then you have about a third that honestly just went to see their buddies and go hang out in the convention hall. And those people will almost always vote with the platform. So the platform in this case networked its people really hard, did a big propaganda effort going into the convention that this isn't necessary. We don't need this. They peeled back off the racist angle, which was utterly bogus. But still, this isn't necessary. And then finally in the room got up and said, well, this could get us sued. Well, okay, it's a moral stand based on a biblical teaching. If we get sued over this, isn't that worthwhile? And also, when Russell Moore stood up a few years ago and was questioned about the ERLC supporting the construction of a mosque in New Jersey, he made this big demagogic speech about religious liberty. And he said, we're going to fight for religious liberty to the end, and I'm willing to go to jail for that. Well, okay, you're willing to go to jail for a mosque, but you're not actually willing to avoid lawsuits over women pastors.
Wow.
Come on. So
well, wouldn't you already get a lawsuit with the Baptist Faith and Message? Wouldn't that already warrant a lawsuit?
Honestly, this is well-trod ground in the courts. This is the kind of religious liberty issue they're simply not going to take up.
I'm following you on that point. I'm just saying, is the Baptist Faith and Message, wouldn't it, based off their articulation of this resolution, wouldn't it still get the same lawsuit that the resolution?
It's not just clear. It's not just clear. We amended it a couple years ago to make it even clearer. So the Baptist Faith and Message is as far out there as you can get. And yes, if it was going to draw a lawsuit, it already would have.
Yeah. Wow. And so to me, it's like I look at the vote total. So here's the vote total for this ban on women pastors. 3,421 people for the ban and 2,191 against the ban. That's the numbers.
Yes. And let me be clear. A lot of the 2,000 something are people who honestly believe this isn't necessary. We don't need to go mucking around in the Constitution when the Baptist Faith and Message is clear. A lot of them are people who honestly believe that the Credentials Committee should be trusted to do its job. Never mind that it hasn't for a number of years now on countless really significant cases. And then third, there are some people like my pastor who's to the right of Attila the Hun. I mean, he couldn't be better, but he's concerned that this is a step toward, and you'll love this, Presbyterianism, where we're telling churches from the top down what they can and cannot do and who they can and cannot hire. And he has a point, but it's not as valid as perhaps he's thinking, because we aren't telling them they can't hire whoever they want. We're telling them that if they hire someone that's outside the confession, they can't vote at the annual meeting on the budget. That's what we're saying. And this is why it's all bogus anyway. We always get this, and we got it in the 80s when it was the so-called moderates, who were just basically the kind of people who would have defrocked Gresham Machen. These guys were absolutely clear.
Right.
that you can't be doing this. This will create top-down authority. No, it's just about who gets a vote over the tithe money.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that there's more feminism in the SBC than we realize.
Well, and that's the other group in that 2000
Right.
plus.
Right.
You know, there are some very real feminists. Some of them are pretty feminine, like Russell Moore.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are some people, and of course, he's left the SBC. So I'm kidding about everything except the femininity.
Yeah.
You know, this is a time in which critical theory has been imbibed quite deeply in a lot of circles. And so, you know, you hear debates over, did David rape Bathsheba? Well, obviously, there's nothing in the text to say that. That's not a biblical, a good faith interpretation. That's an effort to push critical theory power dynamics onto the text. And in the course of that, reorder who is and is not capable of sin, who is and is not capable of redemption, who is and is not capable of being in a pulpit. You know, all these different things that are honestly a political agenda that has nothing to do with theology, possibly a theology, but not theology.
Thus says the Lord God to the bones, behold, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live, and I will lay sinews upon you, and will cause flesh to come upon you, and I will cover you with skin, and I will put breath in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am the Lord. In 1989, the UN Environmental Council warned that entire nations would be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if global warming was not reversed by the year 2000. Against this backdrop, God made a glorious promise of restoration. I will put my spirit within you, and you shall live, and I will place you in your own land, and then you will know that I am the Lord. Will we believe the power of the gospel to bring light to darkness, hope to fearfulness, and ardor to indolence? Will we believe that God can take the dry bones of American liberty and bring them back to life again? Will we believe the gospel enough to believe that the church is a perpetually defeated thing that always survives her conquerors?
Home. It's where you build your legacy, where traditions are started, seeds are planted, meals are shared, and stories are told. We are Chris and Natalie Carpenter, owners of Story Real Estate, and our team of top agents helps people find homes in Moscow, Idaho, and around the country.
Have you thought about a move? Contact us to get connected with a top agent who shares your values and puts your family first. Or reach out to us about our Moscow relocation guide.
Wherever you're looking to go, we can help you find home. Call us at Story Real Estate or visit us at storyrealestate.com and start building your legacy.
But they're relatively few. And I really do need to say that. It's important to understand. Baptists vote overwhelmingly conservative. If anything, that's getting a little bit better rather than worse. It's a handful of leaders and a handful of really big church pastors and a few of their groupies in smaller churches who want to be big church pastors. Of course, people in the pews who are more influenced by the world than by the church. And every church has some of those. We have some of those. But it is a battle we have to keep fighting because, as you know, our 6 seminaries educate 1/3 of the seminary students in this country. Even though we're just 5% of the believers in the country, we're just 11% of the churches, but we're educating 33% of the seminary students. Some of our seminaries, primarily Southeastern at this point, exceedingly woke, and others that have flirted with it or gone further than flirting. And that has a long-term effect on the pulpits of the planet.
100%. 100%. Now, the other thing I heard on the ground was it sounded like there's something like 10,000 people that were signed up to be there, but continually you only see something like 6,000 votes or less.
Mhm.
What does that mean? Like, what? You got pastors showing up, you got messengers showing up and just not even doing their job?
Two things that are both very realistic and very frustrating, but you're probably never going to solve them. The first one is I mentioned that about a third of that room is always interested in being there to meet its friends and go to the exhibit hall and go to dinner. And, they're just not that engaged in the business meeting. They see it as kind of grown up church camp. And to a degree, that's good. But when we're having controversial issues, they actually need to be in the room. They actually need to be engaged. They actually need to take it seriously as a business meeting. We have had a string of presidents over the last 25 years who have made a big effort from the podium to convince the messengers that it isn't really a business meeting. It's really a worship service.
Yeah.
No, it's actually really a business meeting. It's actually the 2 days out of the entire year when we decide how to spend all that money that the widows and orphans gave us to spend. And we need to take that more seriously. So that's part of it. And the other part is that way too many of these guys are booking their airline ticket for mid-afternoon on Wednesday of a business meeting that started on Tuesday. And it's just frustrating. Back in the day, we had 4-day annual meetings, not counting the 2 days of the pastors' conference. It was a full week and people came. We had 45,000 people at the 1985 Dallas convention. We had 10,000 at this one. And, the issues before us, I think, are every bit as important as those then. Although we did not have a conservative candidate challenging the incumbent or anything. And honestly, our incumbent's pretty decent. And that's part of why.
So what do you think of the convention president, Clint Presley's? I know a little about him. I mean, obviously this last year was his first 2 years and sounds like he got reelected.
Yeah, Clint's a good guy, and he's done a good job in a key way that Bart Barber, Ed Litton, and J.D. Greer were utterly incapable of, which is keeping his mouth shut. He doesn't feel the need to tweet about every single thing that comes across the wire. And that's important in an SBC president. I want them to speak to important issues when it's important. But we got into a habit of having presidents who just pop off about, oh, well, I think that guy's a sex abuser, and getting the convention sued. And just no discretion, no wisdom at all. If you want to take hard stands and get attention, I'm good with that. But if you're not doing that with some sense, you need to shut up. And Clint Presley has done a great job of staying on message, talking about the gospel, doing good stuff. I'm not going to say that every single thought that comes out of his head is perfect, but he's a good guy.
Okay, so that brings me to the goofy financial transparency amendment.
Oh, yeah.
It's so weird to me that we got like Elon Musk doing Doge and trying to find, waste, fraud, abuse, all that stuff, publicizing budget stuff, all that stuff. And yet the SBC won't do that. I don't even care. They don't need to do it publicly, but that they at least need to find a way to let all their messengers see the budget and how it's being spent. Like, how come the financial transparency amendment failed? And it failed in proposal format.
Yes. And it will be back. And the law amendment will be back, and the ERLC amendment will be back. These things aren't going away, and they'll gather sympathy over time, and we'll get back to a point where people are organizing again. You saw Dallas. I'm sorry, not Dallas, Nashville in 2021. We doubled the number of messengers in the room. If we had flipped 300 votes, Mike Stone would have been president instead of Ed Litton, and everything would be radically different than it is. But we haven't followed up on that well. And Conservative Baptist Network decided to become more of a pastor fellowship network and support for missionaries and so forth. Well, that's fine, but that's not why we formed it. The new Center for Baptist Leadership is doing fantastic work on these issues, but it is more think tank and even action pack, less an organizing model.
Right.
So we got to retrench and look at that,
Yeah.
and actually turn out messengers. The Baptist in the pew doesn't agree with the things that happened, other than the good stuff like the Obergefell resolution and the pornography resolution and so forth.
Yeah.
But the Baptist in the pew would give, at the very least, would give the ERLC a stern talking to. They would absolutely overwhelmingly pass the law amendment, banning women pastors, and they would absolutely demand 990 level transparency. For your viewers who don't know what that is, nonprofits typically have to file a tax return, basically, called Form 990. You file Form 1040 every year. Nonprofits file Form 990. And it has a bunch of standards for which nonprofits are required to report a lot of information that you ought to have. And religious organizations are largely exempt from that. Not all of them, but churches are, and conventions of churches are, such as the SBC. So the initiative is to try to get our entities to give the messengers at least as much disclosure as the IRS would get from World Vision. And that's a completely legitimate request that they are absolutely hell-bent on preventing from ever coming to fruition.
Don't all nonprofits have to fill out 990 regardless?
Not churches or conventions of churches.
Separation of church and state.
There are actually non-church bodies that can avail themselves of the church exemption. And that's perfectly legitimate. You might have a moral issue there, but the legal issue is pretty clear. And so, no, not everybody does. And the reason is what John Marshall said, Chief Justice John Marshall, all those years ago. The power to tax is the power to destroy. So, government cannot, consistent with the First Amendment, impose that burden on churches. That doesn't mean that the churches shouldn't report to their members how they're spending the money.
Right. Yeah. I don't care about the public aspect of the 990. It's none of my business how a church or a convention spends its money, but it is the people that support the convention. They should be communicating it and having transparency there for sure.
It's certainly our business. Yes. And one of the big points of contention, of course, is salaries. Johnny Hunt, claimed in his court filing that NAM was depriving him of over $600,000 a year in salary. Well, okay, they're debating that. They're pretending that's not true. I'm shocked it's that low, actually. And I know Kevin Ezell's making a lot more than that. But it's really difficult. When I was on the executive committee, I pretty much had to go into the cone of silence and swear blood oaths just to get the salary range for the president of the executive committee. It was absurd. And they never showed me the actual number, which makes me wonder, how did they pick the actual number? I was an officer of the executive committee. We're legally responsible not only for that number, but for setting it. That's not how they work. You'll recall that we had a president of Lifeway a few years ago. One trustee decided to give him $1 million severance package when he retired. It's like, what? This isn't legal. This isn't moral. It's certainly not ethical, but this is how things are being done. And that's why they don't want it looked at.
That's right. That's right.
We see the bodies and where they're buried.
Okay, Rod, but before I get to the abolish ERLC resolution, I want to I got a couple plugs here I need to read, but first off, you are going to be speaking at our Pre-Business Makers conference before our FightLife Feast conference begins on October 16th.
Cool.
Yep, I got you speaking, and you agreed to via text, so I assume you put it on your calendar.
Yes. It wouldn't hurt to send me a calendar
Okay.
invite.
All right. I'll do it. I'll do it. Fair enough. FLF, Fight Laugh Feast School Wars Conference. In the garden, Toby's way better at reading this, but in the garden, long ago, our first parents fell to the Dark Lord's deception, sparking a cosmic war between light and darkness. Today, the battle rages in the hearts of young future warriors in a struggle as old as time. Dark forces cloak their lies and promises of peace, wielding imperial government schools to mold children into minions of a godless empire. Yet hope rises. Nearly 10 million kids have escaped, trained by parents and faithful Christian schools, homeschool movements, and so forth in the ways of the light. The resistance is growing. Join the rebellion October 16th through 18th, 2025 at Rocketown in Nashville, Tennessee. The faithful gather to strategize and rally. So go to FightLifeFeast.com. Sign up now. We still we have all the legacy fun that we've been doing at all our conferences. We have jumpy castles for the kids. We have booths. We have beer and psalms. We open with beer and psalms. We got speakers including Pastor Wilson, Pastor Toby, Pastor George Grant, Pastor Ben Merkel, President Ben Merkel. We got David Goodwin speaking. We got some headmasters of schools speaking. We got some. We're doing TED Talks, what we call Gear Up Talks at the conference. And then, of course, the Pre-Business Makers Conference happens Thursday afternoon. So it becomes a tax write-off for you business leaders. Rod Martin speaking. And, oh, my goodness, I'm drawing a blank. But our newest and final speaker at the main conference is Larry Taunton. Larry Taunton is going to be speaking. His topic is going to be subversive arrows based off Psalm 127. We're very glad to have Larry join us for this year's conference. So go to FightLifeFeast.com, and if you're a business and you want to sponsor us, click on sponsor. And if you want to come to our corporate partner dinner, which is Wednesday night, which doesn't really show up on the agenda, Wednesday night, our corporate partner dinner, we'd love to see you there. Email me, waterboy@crosspolitic.com. That's waterboy@crosspolitic.com. We'll see you there. Rowdy Christian Merch, which is our merch store, which will be there at the conference also. If you're a fan of Crosspolitic or the Fight Laugh Feast Network, then surely you know we have a merch store, right? Rowdy Christian Merch is one of our one-stop shops for everything. We got t-shirts, hoodies, hats, but we got specialty items like backpacks, mugs, coffee, even AirPod cases. I got an AirPod case. It's fantastic. So visit Rowdy Christian Merch at rowdychristian.com, rowdychristian.com. And we even have the Gulf of America shirts on Rowdy Christian, rowdychristian.com. Make sure you guys check it out. Support our merchandise store. Thank you. Rod, so there's actually amendment. I think this is the second year this popped up, where or second 2 years in a row, or 2 conventions in a row, where there was a proposal to abolish the ERLC. Yeah. Now, the constitutional motion to eliminate the SBC's it's a public policy arm, and they wanted to eliminate this ERLC, this public policy arm, is because it's perceived liberal drift. Now, the vote to retain was 3,744 votes to retain ERLC. The vote to abolish was 2,819. So that's 57% versus 43%. What's your take? I mean, obviously, Russell Moore ran ERLC. Now you got Brent Leatherwood running ERLC. It's not a popular organization, obviously. What's your take on it?
Brent Leatherwood is Russell Moore without the charm, grace, or intellect. He is a train wreck. He has no presence on Capitol Hill. He has no relationship with this administration, and he has spent most of his time focused on exactly 2 things: trying to pass a red flag law in the state legislature in Tennessee and trying to suppress the Trans Shooters Manifesto.
That's right.
Which he succeeded in doing for a very long time. Yeah. And you just look at this and it's like, okay, we're spending tithe money for this. Yeah. I mean, can't you take your Soros money you're also taking in and go do that somewhere else? But the truth is the ERLC is a terribly constructed public policy arm, and it doesn't matter who runs it. You could run it. I could run it. It would still be a bad idea. And we've got some really great men like Richard Land, who was the longtime first head of it,
Okay.
who are still all on board for the ERLC. But in reality, do we need an Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission? So first, we have 6 seminaries that each have an ethics department. So why do we need a 7th?
Yeah.
Second, religious liberty, they're not doing religious liberty. They're doing red flag laws and trans shooter manifesto suppression. So, I mean, this is just pointless. And again, even when they make a big show, as they do every year in the 3 weeks leading up to the convention, about how they're all about, banning pornography and they're for life. Well, no, they're not. They actually worked assiduously in Louisiana to prevent an abortion abolition bill from becoming law. They have actually worked against life in numerous instances. They have attacked pro-lifers like Dusty Devers, and they've gone out of their way to avoid having any meaningful impact in the nation's capital, which is supposedly their job. So as far as religious liberty, one, unless you want mosque construction like Russell Moore, they don't really do that.
Wow.
When we were in the middle of the lockdowns, they didn't do any of that.
No, they
Russell
didn't.
Moore didn't speak up for a single church that got shut, didn't speak up for you when you got arrested, didn't speak up for John MacArthur or even Roland Slade, who was chairman of our executive committee at the time, didn't stand up for any of those people. Instead, he did online book reviews of where the wild things are and plotted his coup d'etat and burned the place down on his way out the door to go to Christianity Today, where, as you saw at Easter, he published an article questioning the veracity of Scripture on whether Jesus was even nailed to the cross. I mean, this is Christianity Today, but this is who was running the place all those years. And again, Brent Leatherwood, Russell Moore, without the grace, charm, or intellect, it's only gotten worse. So what's happened is 2 years in a row, you've had a motion from the floor that wasn't terribly organized, had no big grassroots effort to come to the convention and vote for it, and got well over 40% of the vote 2 years running. And the vote this year was higher than the vote last year.
Wow.
And the person who sponsored the motion this year was not just, whosoever will. It was Willie Rice, one of the biggest pastors in the convention. So and of course, Jack Graham, who's a former president of the convention, came out strongly for abolishing the ERLC. This is close to $4 million of tithe money that needs to be spent on missionaries. And we can get Family Research Council to do our lobbying.
That's great.
And by the way, he's a Southern Baptist and has been a Southern Baptist pastor. There is no reason that Tony Perkins cannot do this for us on an outsourced basis. And if not, the executive committee should do it in-house, like the executive committee controls Baptist Press. And the reason I say that is not because I have a lot of love for the people currently running the executive committee. They're a train wreck. They are a woke nightmare, especially now that they just elected Adam Wyatt, the vice chairman of the thing. But doesn't matter. The point is, they are the most responsible body in Southern Baptist life. They're elected from all the states. They have a significantly more connection to the people of the Southern Baptist Convention, and they actually have the ministry brief of serving as the annual meeting between annual meetings. So if there's going to be an ERLC, God forbid, if you're going to have one, it should be a subsidiary of the EC in the way that Baptist Press is. Of course, Baptist Press is also a train wreck, but it doesn't have to be. And the structure at least makes sense. With the ERLC, they're off here doing their own thing, and they're not really accountable to anybody, but they purport to speak for 13 million Southern Baptists, which is absurd and stupid and causes problems.
I was done with the ERLC a long time ago, and I'm not even part of the SBC.
Well, and I want to give props to Richard Land. I mentioned him a minute ago. His guiding principle as president of the ERLC was that the entity would not speak to any issue that Southern Baptists had not given absolute clarity on through a resolution or through the Baptist Faith and Message. And he did that for however long he was president. I think it was like 25 years. Okay. Russell Moore comes in, throws that out the window. It's just whatever Russell thinks this week.
Right.
And he made sure that he had a board that would never fire him.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it sounds like the convention overall had some really good stuff. Of course, a couple stuff that's still kind of discouraging and frustrating. What do you think? Is there anything that, first of all, two things. Is there anything that we're missing that we need to hit? And then what do you think of the long-term trajectory of SBC?
Well, first of all, no one in a serious position will admit to being woke now. So that's a huge improvement. You know, we've gone from passing Resolution 9 in 2019, where, you know, we're endorsing critical race theory as a useful analytical tool. Well, okay. And also Satanism, and also Baal worship, and also the Communist Manifesto. Why not? You're honestly, some of those things may be better. So, you know, and they're really all the same. So we've gone from that to everybody denying they ever knew anything about any of that. And in fact, there was actually a significant SBC leader who shall remain nameless, who put out a statement before the convention that, you know, we never suggested there was any wrongdoing at the executive committee. There was, you know, the DOJ investigation didn't have anything to do with wrongdoing. It's like, what are you talking about? You guys made us waive attorney-client privilege. You made us bring in Guidepost, this LGBTQ lobbying group, basically, to come in and pour through everybody's life and put everybody through the ringer and cost us millions in legal fees. They're going to probably end up having to sell the building and all this, but no, they're recanting. They want to forget that period of history. I would say that's encouraging, actually. That says that the tide has turned in a way where some chameleons have had to change color. And that's good. But I also think that Clint Presley is a massive improvement over his 3 immediate predecessors in the presidency. I think we will get better appointments out of Clint. We'll see. There's, you know, that works through the process kind of slowly. But I think Clint will do a pretty good job on that. And I think that we're past the point where some of the worst actors are viable candidates. And you saw that, especially when Jared Wellman got nuked for president of the executive committee. You know, the executive committee itself beat him about 50-30. And that's almost unprecedented. When the personnel committee says, hey, or the search committee says, this is the guy, you know, they always get it. Nope, not Jared. And Jared is one of the most dishonest human beings in Southern Baptist life. So that was a huge victory. And you know, we're seeing a lot of positive action, but we need more. And we need people to actually show up at the annual meeting and actually vote for real change, not radical change, not anything crazy, just back to the Bible, just back to the Baptist Faith and Message. Just do the things that Baptists believe their entities are out there doing for them.
Rod, thanks so much for the update. Thanks for joining Crosspolitic. Appreciate you, brother. Appreciate everything you had to say there. If you're single, get married. If you're married, have kids. If you have kids, go baptize them. Until next week, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Crosspolitic without Pastor Toby and Chocolate Knox.